Hello and welcome to another Keycloak tutorial. Today I'll be walking through the Keycloak administration console, which is a user interface that allows us to manage all the Keycloak functionality. So right here, what you see is I logged in and I was brought to this landing page. And essentially what it shows is an overview of the realm information and some provider information. So here, first of all, you want to have an admin user. So the first time you launch Keycloak, you can create the user through the UI, or in my case, I created Keycloak using Docker Compose, and I configured my admin user in my Docker Compose. And the videos of how I did that are in my playlist channel. So just if you're curious as to how I did that, just check out the videos in my channel. Okay, so now here we are in the master realm. So what is a realm, first of all? So you can think of a realm as a set of users, credentials, roles, and groups. So a user belongs to and logs into a realm, and realms are isolated from one another and can only manage and authenticate the user that they control. So you create a realm to provide a space where you can create users and give them permissions to use applications. And then the first time you log in, you're typically in the master realm, which is a top level realm from which you create other realms. Here in the admin console, there are two types of realms that exist. So the first one you see here is a master realm, which is a top level realm. And then we have other realms which are created through this master realm. So the master realm, actually best practice is that you just use it to create other realms. You shouldn't have, if you have an application, you shouldn't configure the settings for application in the master realm. Instead, what you want to do is create a separate realm or realms and then use those for your applications. So the reason why realms are key is because of the isolation they provide. So following this security model helps us prevent accidental changes and follows the tradition of permitting user accounts to only access those privileges and powers necessary for the successful completion of their current task. Here we have the realm information, which is just a general overview of the realm functionality. So we have the version, I'm using Keycloak version 20.0.0. And the profile here, we see we have enable features. So Keycloak has some features that are enabled by default, but it's not going to show them here. It will only show features that are in the preview or experimental state. So I don't have any that are enabled. So we can see they're all disabled. We have experimental here, we have preview here. So this enabled features is excluding the default ones that are already supported. And then here we have the disabled features, which by default, when I ran my Keycloak, my dev Keycloak instance, these were disabled. So I haven't touched anything here. Now in the provider section, we have two columns, the SPI and providers. So the SPI is a service provider interface. And this basically helps, or the functionality here is what Keycloak implements by default. And this functionality can also be extended if you want to customize some behavior in Keycloak. And I'll show you an example. So here you have an SPI column and you have a providers column. One common SPI, or one that I've used before, is the events handler SPI. So if you come here, we can see that if you look for events listener, sorry, not events handler, but events listener, we can see there's two that are enabled or used by Keycloak by default. So this is JBoss logging, which listens for logging events, and then we have an email listener as well. Now, there could come a time where you want to implement an events listener that listens for something else. Let's say when a user is created, you want to listen for that event and do something with it, maybe send it to another API, or when a group is created, things like those. So you can easily extend this SPI, which is an interface, and implement your own logic. So let's come into the browser and see where we can find an example of this. So let's look for event listener, let's say Keycloak. And here we can see we have the event listener provider. And as shown in the admin console, you see we have the email event and then JBoss login, which matches what we have here. And so you can see they both extend, while this interface actually, while these classes extend this interface. So if you go into this class, you can see, it extends that event listener provider. So if you wanted to implement, let's say, using the example I gave earlier, like a user event listener or group event listener, you just inherit or implement this interface, and then you'd want to pass that into Keycloak, and I'll show that in a later tutorial. The way, like, once you have implemented a provider, you have to bundle them into a jar and then put them into Keycloak at a specific location, and then Keycloak will be able to pick them up. But what I want to show here is that an example of an SPI and the corresponding provider. So the SPI in our case was the events listener, and then the corresponding provider was the JBoss login and email. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a realm. Here we just enter a simple realm name. In this case, I'll call it demo. Enable on and create. And now I'm in the demo realm. Notice I was in master before and I'm in demo. So if you come here, I can look and see, let's just go through this and see my clients. So by default, Keycloak is going to create a realm with these default clients. And I'll go into what clients are in a second. And we just have pretty much the same thing. There's some defaults that Keycloak creates when it creates your realm. So no users, no groups, no sessions, no events. But we do have roles and scopes and clients. We also have some realm settings here, which I'll also go into later in the tutorial. So we have the general settings, and then we have a whole bunch of tabs up here that I'll explain later on in the tutorial. Okay, now let's go over clients. What is a client? As you can see here, Keycloak has given us a definition. It says clients are applications and services that can request authentication of a user. So what does this mean? If you think about Keycloak, it is a solution or a service that provides, allows us to authenticate and also provide some authorization functionality. So a client is anything or any entity that wants to use Keycloak for that purpose. And these clients are actually modeled after or are representative of the clients that OAuth 2 specifies. So OAuth 2 has different grant types for clients. So you have the code grant type, you have the client credential grant type, you have the implicit grant type, and you have the resource owner grant type. So Keycloak basically models or uses that same structure in this client functionality that it provides. Let me quickly show what I meant by Keycloak modeling or representing the OAuth 2 client types. So here I'm on the OAuth 2 website, OAuth.net, and you can see the grant types here: authorization code, PKCE, client credentials, etc. We have implicit flow, the legacy one, and password grant, which is also legacy. If I come to any of these clients, so let's say account, and scroll down to that capability config, I can see that this has been selected standard flow. And we see here that it means that this enables support of authorization code flow for this client. What that means is that this client is an authorization flow type client, which is what we have here, authorization code type client. Now let's go to another client. Say admin CLI. Scroll down to the same section, and we see this says direct access grants. In terms of OAuth 2 specification, this enables support of resource owner password credentials grant for this client. Again, which matches what we have here, although that's legacy. So what this means is that these clients that we create are essentially OAuth 2 clients. And when we create the client, we'll specify what type of grant type we want to apply to that client. Now, you can also think of a client, or rather, let me give an example of some clients. So if you have a UI, let's say you have a web app that you want to have some login functionality on that web app, you would want to create that as an authorization code client, like this account, because that would take advantage of the OAuth 2 authorization code grant type, which is what is recommended for browser-based clients. And that's why you see in these examples here for account and account console, they have some URLs here. And when you click the URL, it takes you to the browser. And when you click sign in, this is what is going to interact. This is a client that's going to interact with Keycloak. Now, admin CLI or admin CLI is a client that you use maybe in a terminal, and you supply your username and password, and it gives you back a token. And now you can interact with Keycloak using that token. So what I want to show here is that we have some, the clients that are created by default, and then also the type of client, which is based off of these grant types that we have here. So back to this signing page, we don't have any user created, so there's no way I can sign in. But later on, I'm going to create a user and I'll be able to sign in. But for now, let me just create a client. So I'm going to create a client, let's say demo client. Name is just, let's see, display name. So I'll just call it demo client. Always display in console. We'll just keep that as a default. So next, so here's where you select the grant type or the client type that you want. In this case, you have two selected, which means this client can be either or. So either it can be standard flow or direct access grants. I will go with, let's see. Actually, I'm going to create a service account. No, let me create a direct access account. So this is the resource owner password credentials grant. And save. And now it has been created. And if I come to my clients, I see it here. So remember, direct access means you provide your username and password. So there's no, it's not recommended for browsers, but the idea here is that you just provide a username and password, and in exchange, you get a token. If you want to find out more about all this grant type stuff, I suggest reading the auth documentation of this section here, because it explains a lot of this in detail. I can't really cover that in this tutorial. I was going to focus more on Keycloak, but this is good information to have so that you can understand what's going on in these clients. Okay, let's look at roles. So here we have the roles tab, which is referring to the client role. So right now I'm still in the client, I'm in the demo client, and if you come to roles, we have no roles defined. And a role typically applies to one type of user. So for example, if you have an organization, your roles might include an admin, a user, a manager, and an employee or employee roles. And an application can assign access and permissions to a role and then assign multiple users to that role so that the users have the same access and permissions. So let's say in the example I just gave up, admin, user, manager, and employee roles. So anytime we get a new employee, we'll just assign them the employee role, and their privileges or their access rights or their permissions are going to be different than an admin, because the roles define the boundaries of what you can access. So let's go ahead and create a role here. I'll just call it demo role. I'll give it a description. And there we're done. So here we have the attributes, where you can assign attributes to a role, like a key value. And then you have the users in the role. So here we can assign the users that we want to have this role. I will not do this now. I'll do this in a later version of the tutorial. Then you have the permissions as well. So this is just an example of how you can create a role in a client. So in addition to client roles, which are scoped to a client, we also have realm roles, which are scoped to the realm. So these roles in here are universal, or rather global to the realm, and therefore they are, or they can be shared across clients because they are available to the entire realm. So we have the realm roles here, and you can see realm roles are the roles that you define for use in the current realm. Okay, let's talk about client scopes. What are client scopes? So client scopes are a common set of protocol mappers and rules that are shared between multiple clients. So when you create a client scope here in this section, what you do is you're creating a client scope, but then you're going to define a mapper that is going to take some information that's stored in Keycloak and then add it to the token that is generated when Keycloak generates a token. Hopefully that makes sense, but I will go through an example to illustrate what I mean. So let's go ahead and create a client scope. So here we have a client scope. I will just call it demo scope. Description, demo, client scope, type. So here we have the types. We have none, which is no type. We have default, which means that every time a client is created, any client we create, is going to have this client scope, or we can have optional to where it is optional. So when you create a client, you can opt to add this or not add it. So I will go and say default so that every client I create is going to have this client scope. Protocol, I leave it at OpenID Connect because that's what we want to use when we're creating tokens. Display content on screen, I leave this as a default. Content screen text, I leave that as default. Including token scope, leave that as default as well. What does this mean? This means that the name of this client scope will be added to the access token property scope, as well as the token introspection endpoint response. So when the token is generated, this scope, demo scope, will be added to usually when you create a token, there'll be like a scope field or a scope claim. It'll have a bunch of scopes. So when this is on, this scope is going to be added to that. Display order, I don't care about that. So let's save. Okay, so now we have saved it. Now, what are we going to do? We need to add some mappers. What do mappers do? We can add a predefined mapper, which comes with Keycloak, or configure a new mapper. Let me add a predefined mapper. I'll come here and say, let's see, what do I want to add? Let's say I want to add an address mapper. So what this means is that the demo scope, client scope that I just created, when I add this mapper, I'm going to define certain fields that are defined in this address. This is predefined. So certain fields that are defined in this address, a mapper, are going to be added to the token when a user authenticates using this client scope. I know it means like it's a bit confusing now, but I'll show a demo and it'll all become clear. These instructions are the UI is a bit confusing, but once I give a demo, it's going to be clear. So let me just add this address. And when we come into address, let's see what it says. So it says, okay, mapper type, user address is the default, name, address, add to ID token on. So we're using OpenID. That means that it's going to generate an ID token, and an ID token just has information about the user who's logging in. So your first name, last name, email, etc. Access token, add to access token. Access token. This is what determines permissions or access to a specific resource. So we want to add that client scope as well. Add to user info. Yes, we're going to add this as well. So user info is just like the information about a user. So we're going to add this information to the user info. User attribute name for street. So what's happening here is that this is a predefined client scope. So it already has certain attributes that it's expecting. So when we create this attribute, this mapper, and we're mapping it to our client scope, when certain attributes are defined in the user, those attributes are going to be added to the token. So here what it's saying is that, like, if our user has a street attribute defined, a locality, a region, postal code, country formatted, if our user has those values defined, those values are going to be added to the token. So I'm just going to save that. So that's done. Okay, so let's come to client scope. So I have the address. I haven't created any roles for this client scope yet. So I'll talk about client scope roles and later on in this tutorial. All right, so now we have a client scope. And then I will go ahead and I think I talked about realm roles already. So these are the roles that are global to the realm. Now let's create a user. See, we have no users here. So if we came to clients and came here, we cannot log in because there are no users at all. So let's create a user. Come to users, create new user, demo. Let's say demo at user.com. Of course, in real life, you'd probably want to use an actual email here, because if you set like email verified, this will probably send an email to your user if you set this to on. But for now, I'm just doing this for a demo, so I'm not going to like use an actual email. But in production, you'd want to use an actual email, because if you want to have emails sent there, you want it to be a legit email. Then first name, let's say demo, last name user. Required actions. I don't care about all of these right now because it's a demo. You can configure OTP, terms and conditions, update password, all this you can configure and have them as required user actions so that, like, for example, if a user logs in, they have to update their password, or if a user logs in, they have to update the profile or verify the email. For now, I'll just leave it as blank. Groups, I don't have any groups. I'll create a group later on. Let's create a user. So that's done. All right, so now we have a user here. And so if you go back to the client and we go to this account or account console, you see the point to the same URL. Oh, I forgot one thing. Go back to users, demo, credentials. I need to set a password here. I'll set a very complex password called demo and temporary. I don't want it to be temporary because it's just a demo. So I will have it turn that off. That way I can just log in after I save this. So I save it, save. So now I have a password. Now go back to the clients. Not now. And then I want to log into a Keycloak account, right? So I come here, account, personal info. It asks me to log in. Say demo, which is the user I just created. Demo again. Now I'm in. And if I come to the developer tools, I'll be able to see the token that's generated. So I'm in network now. Let's say I do this again. Let's say signing in, credentials. So now here's my token right here. And if I put this in IO, you can see, like, here are my credentials. I logged in via account console. This is a authorized party. And you can see the username, demo user, given name, demo, family name, user, email. So all that is the stuff that I actually just created right now when let me close this. When I generated the user right here, demo user. So all of this is reflected in the token. So we successfully created a user. Okay, so let's see how we can apply a client scope to our user. So here we have the user, and let's go to client scopes. So this is the client scope we just created, demo scope. Has a map of address, right? And the address has street, locality, region, postal code, country. So what I want to do is we'll come to the users, come to the user here, attributes. Let's say the attribute here is street. Let's say 123 Main Street. Let's say locality is Philadelphia. Let's say country. Let's say. Then we save. Now those are the attributes that the user has. And remember, in the client scope, we define those attributes in our mapper. And what I'm saying is that for this demo scope, client scope, we should map anything, any user attribute for address that maps either street, locality, region, or postal code or country. It should be in the token, because you see here we said add to ID token, add to access token. So that's what we're going to do. So now we know I just added street, I just added locality, I just added country in our users, in our user attributes. So country, street, locality. So what I'm going to do is let me close these first of all. I don't need them. And then let me refresh here. Because this, remember, this is my demo user. So this is the user that I just modified right here, demo. Here we go. So if I refresh this, it got a token, initialize it, and I have the credentials. So let me see if our credentials are going to have those address attributes that I just added. So we come here, go to druid.io. Nope, they're not there. Okay, so why is that? Let's go back here and look at the, so we have the attributes here, right? Country, street, locality. But the thing is, when we added this client scope, demo scope, let's see if our client, because I'm logging in via account console. Let's see if this has a client scope. So it does not have a client scope. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it. So add client scope, I'm going to add demo scope. Let's make it a default. So what this means now is that since I logged in, okay, so let me go back, right? So I logged in via account console, and account console now has demo scope. So what this means is that the token that's created when I log into account console should have those address fields that I just defined in the user, because I've added the scope in here, right? So let's go back. Let me close this and let me come back to clients, account console. Oops, clients, account console. So I'm going to come here. And this is my log. This is a login screen. This is a client. Let's go to personal info. We'll develop web inspector. I'll just load this again to get a token. I'll come to account, come to token. This is an access token. When you see bearer, that means access. ID token is different, but here it uses the bearer token to access this UI. So let's go to the bearer token, and this should also have those address configs that I just added. And here we go. We see them. Street address, locality, country, which is what I added in this in the scope, the client scope, demo scope, the mapper, address, and you can see address. These are the qualifying fields that need to be added in the scope, and these qualifying fields expect values from the user attribute, right? So when the user attribute is what I defined here, and I only defined 3 user attributes: country, street, locality, which is what you see here: country, street address, and locality. If I defined other values here, so let's go back to the client scopes, demo scope, mappers, address. So we have street, locality, region. Oh, okay. One thing I want to mention is for street, you see it says street here, but it says which will be used to map to street address subclaim inside address token claim, which is exactly what we're saying here. This is the address token claim. This is the street address sub token claim. So that's what I'm saying. Like it's defined as street here, but the help icon tells us what exactly is going to happen. This street user attribute is going to be mapped to the street address subclaim inside the address token claim. All right. So this postal code and locality. So if you come back to users, demo, attributes, let's say postal code, and I put in 19104, save. Remember, here I only have 3 attributes: street address, locality, and country, which is what I had before. If I come here and refresh, come to account, and grab this access token, which when you created a client scope, you said that client scope should be added to the access token. So come here, access token. We only have 3 here. Now I have postal code in here because I added it. So you can see what the client scope does. In this case, it enriches this JWT token or the JWT token. It enriches it depending on what you define in your client scope. And that's where the mappers come into play, because when you define, you can either use a predefined mapper, which is what I did. I use the address mapper, which has all these defined, so I didn't have to define anything. Or you can create your own mapper by configuration. And there's this selection here. and you can select what you want, and whatever you select here is going to map to something in Keycloak, and then whatever it maps to is what is going to be shown in the token here, is what is going to be added to the token if you want it to be added. Let's look at realm roles. Realm level roles are a global namespace to define your roles. They are roles that you define for use in the current realm. So any roles we define here will not be visible to any other realm. Let's look at this users view. So this view shows us the users that are in the current realm. I already have an existing user here, but to add a new user, you simply come here, fill in these fields, and you are good to go. So we have the username field, email verified, which is a Boolean. If it's off, it means the email has not been verified. If it's on, the email has been verified. First name, last name, some user actions here, like if you want the user to configure OTP when they try to log in, terms and conditions, if you want them to update their password when they log in, etc. So you can configure some actions in here. Then you can also join groups. I don't have any groups in this realm yet, so there's none that show up here. And that is it. So let me go to the existing user and just show some of the tabs there. So I have this guy. So here are the details that we filled out earlier. And the ID of the user, when it was created, the username, etc. So that's the basic what we saw in the previous page. Then we have attributes here. If you want more fields that are defined here, you can define them as attributes. So you can type in anything here. Got an attribute called foobar. Save. Credentials, this is where you set your password. I already have one set. Role mapping, here's where you can assign a role to a user. So this is a default realm role that is assigned to this user. So if I come back to, where is it, realm roles, see how the default roles demo here. This was created by default when I created the realm. So that's automatically assigned to the user when they are created. So that's roles. Groups, shows the groups that they are currently in. I don't have any. Consents, which will be recorded when users try to access a client that is configured to require consent. So that will be recorded here. This is the IDP page link. And then this is a sessions link, which shows where the user has been logged in. So right now, there's no sessions. And I'm going to change that. This is the Keycloak user console. So I'll come here and log in as my user. Now I'm logged in here. And if I come back here and refresh, I should see a session. And boom, there it is. And it tells me when I just logged in, the IP address and the client I'm using. And if I come back and log out, it'll disappear. I refresh, gone. Groups in Keycloak allow you to manage a common set of attributes and role mappings for a set of users. Users can be members of 0 or more groups, and users inherit the attributes and role mappings assigned to each group. So here I don't have any groups created yet in this realm, so I'll go ahead and create one. Let's call it demo, create. And now we can see we have one group here. And if I click into it, there's several tabs. So child groups, you can create subgroups. If you want to add it, create another group inside of this group, I can do that here. Members is where you can add a member. So right now there's no users assigned to this group, so I'll just assign this to show how it's done. So now this user is a part of this group. I have attributes, again, similar to user attributes. If you want to define fields here and values, perhaps some metadata about the group, you can add that here. Role mapping is where we assign roles to this group. You can come here and choose the roles you want to assign. So you can assign multiple roles to the group. And then the users that are members of this group will inherit those roles automatically because they are in this group. Then here we have fine-grained permissions if you want to turn them on. Here you can see several actions. You can rename the group or you can delete it. Okay, so this sessions view shows us a list of users in this realm and the clients that they access within the session. So here I have an example of a client that was accessed during within the session. And this is similar to the one I'd shown earlier for the users, but the one for the users, that session view is just for that particular user. This sessions view is for all sessions in the realm. So for example, if I come back here and log back in, user, now come here and refresh, it should show up in the global section. And also if I come to the users and sessions, it has shown up here as well. So this is just a global view of everything within the realm, not just for users. Here on the events page, we would have a list of the events that are logged that come from users and admin events, or user and admin actions. By default, nothing is logged here because this feature is disabled, but we can enable it by either clicking this link or navigating through the left panel, come to the realm settings, come to events, and here we can set the user events. So we'll save the events, and you can say expiry 3 minutes, and that means that after 3 minutes they'll be deleted. So we save, and now if I come to my user here, first of all, let me come back here and verify that we have no events, so no events at all still. But then let me do a user event of signing out from this user account, and I should see an event pop up here. So now we see we have the logout event that just happened. And if I log back in, I should see that same users events happening in here. So I have the login and the code token event. And you can also filter here by various parameters. So user ID, event type. I only want to see, let's say, the login events. That will filter out, and I can clear that out. So that's how you do the user events. Admin events is similar. So if I come back to this link, set admin event, an admin event is any event that happens in this Keycloak console because you need admin rights or permissions to perform actions in here. So this is anything I'll do in this console will be recorded in that admin events page. So let me just turn this on. I'll just give it a random expiration. Let's say 3 minutes again. And I'll say save. And now if, let's say I modify this again, this is an admin event. So I'm modifying this. Let's save that. I come to events, go to admin events, and we can see a whole bunch of events in here for updates. I've updated the events config. So this is an example of how you can log admin events if you choose to. And then if you want to clear the events, go back here, settings, clear user events. You can clear them, come back to events, then the user events. But the admin events are still there, so I didn't clear them. And so I'll do the same thing for admin events. So let me just revert this first for the users, confirm, let me save. So now I've turned off event login for users. And then let me clear this for admin events. So let me turn this off, confirm, save, and let me clear now, because a lot of those actions I'm performing are still admin events. So if I clear admin events and perform the actions, they'll still show up. So let me clear. So that should have gotten rid of the admin events, and they're gone.